right, so let's keep going. As you must have heard from your class representative, we'll be talking about the cardiovascular system. And it's a system that appears to be very long. If you see most of the biology book, the system is large. And reason for that one, it borrows a lot from other systems and before, including the endocrine system, system. So if you what we learned so far in a system to be a bit strict, much of it also concerns and a little bit of histology, which will not go into details, which I hope so. The lecturer with anatomy did an extensive work on the same. So this system of the heart together with the tubes that connect it around, and that will be our blood vessels, the heart. The function of this system is majorly circulate food and oxygen reducing blood, which we reviewed in our previous system when we cover blood, one of the types of blood. Here we'll be interested specifically in erythrocytes, which is produced by the bone marrow. Another function also is to carry away the waste product. We did talk about the CO2 being produced by actively respiring tissue, which will later be exhaled via the lungs. Another aspect that we when we reviewed the blood process is the process of coagulation, which has the steps of minimizing blood loss. And the first step was first to constrict the blood vessels, which will be followed by formation of a platelet plug, and later the blood clotting will be minimized. And we talk about the cascade from the two pathways, that is the extrinsic and the intrinsic pathway. Those are the section that we already handled outside the system, but they are quite closely regulated with that. On top of that, so right now you could be feeling a little bit cold or you could be feeling a little bit warm. That is a courtesy of the cardiovascular system. The blood is moving around your body at a very specific speed, being determined by many other factors as we see, and including through that one, not entirely on its own, but it's a major player in the regulation of the body temperature. We'll see later when we cover the nervous system, regulation centers in the brain, specifically hypothalamus, but they coordinate the muscles in the body and heat generation. It will be circulated from one part of the body, ensure it is uniformly distributed. Equally, when you feel cold or very hot, so the heat has to be lost through the body via the skin through the same mechanism. Those are the major functions of the cardiovascular system. We say it's made up of the heart and the blood vessels. We'll not go into details about that one, but we already know that it's made up of 4 chambers. It's made up of the 4 valves. Major part of it, or the bulk of it, is made up of a muscles called the myocardium. Inside it is lined by a layer called epicardium, and outside endocardium, and outside is form of a fibrous tissue layer called epicardium. That is a diagram from your slide, as you can just appreciate the usual diagram in any other anatomical book showing the direction of the flow of blood. And that one will give us 2 types of circulation. We have blood that is going directly from the heart into the lungs, when you call that one a pulmonary circulation. And from the pulmonary, as we saw later in the respiratory system, that blood will be oxygenated and later sent to the left side of the heart. That is the left ventricle. It will be pumped to the rest of the body, and it will be utilized by the whole tissues in the body, and later return via the vena cava into the right atrium, and we call that one the systemic circulation. Those are the 2 types of circulation. We have the pulmonary, which supports the lung and ensure that the blood is oxygenated. Section direction just still in from the ventricle into the artery and form a complete cycles in around 6 stages, as we see later. We also have the coronary circulation. So that is another small circulation that usually form about 5% of the total cardiac output. So cardiac output is a term that will later define it or operationalize it, but it simply means the quantity of blood that is being supplied to any other part of the body. So the heart, as it does the work of pumping blood, it needs oxygen, it also needs nutrients. It will get its supply from the coronary artery, which later will be pumped back via the coronary vein into some part of the right auricle. And that will initially cause some issue a little bit, that the saturation in the blood or the oxygenation will never reach 100% because of that blood that we call it a bypass. As you sit now, your blood, your heart is pumping on its own continuously. You're not aware of it. In fact, you're not even supposed to be beating unless you have some other called palpitation that make you aware of beating. Unless you are lying in a flat position and in contact into some hard surface, at that point, because of the transmission of the sound, you could be able to hear your heart beating. But generally, you are unable to hear your heart beating. But it's beating continuously, is what keeps you going or making you alive. And the heartbeat is originated from some 2 points in the body, or specifically in the heart. We have areas that we call them the origin of the impulses. And the first one where the impulses originate is what we call the sinoatrial node or the SA node. For other terms or other reference material, we call it the pacemaker, because that will keep your heart pacing. And that is where we have some specific types of cells that are excitable. Later toward the end of this week, we'll review another sessions on the contraction of muscles, and we'll be able to see exactly how does the SA node is able to generate an impulse. That will handle in that session. But for now, just know that the pacemaker part of the heart is the SA node. So that part is located on the right atrium. And just below it, because of the contraction or the rate of contraction or the rate of impulse generation per second, that will determine the rate of the normal heartbeat. So the heartbeat rate originates from the SA node. Just below it, at the base of the still right atrium, we have the FE node, the atrioventricular node. It's a region that slightly moderate the impulses from the FE node. It could later increase it slightly or maybe reduce it a bit to ensure that you have your stable baseline heart rate that you have right now. Below the FE node, we'll go to a small region called the Purkinje fibers, which will later relay the impulses into the ventricles. And from the Purkinje fibers, we'll go into the left and the right bundle branches, which will supply the right and the left ventricle, and that will ensure that the two ventricles contract. So you have just an animation here from your screens. I hope you're able to see it. We have the SA node here, and we have the AV node here. So the impulse is generated, transmitted, or carried forward into the AV node. We have a small region there made up of some bundles called the bundles of E's, which will later subdivide into the right and the left bundle branches, which will ensure that the ventricles contracts and pumps the blood out. And that one forms the part of what you call the cardiac cycle. The impulses being generated from the heart, we can be able to record them and transform them from an electrical impulse into something readable, either you can see in a screen or we should be able to print it on a paper. And we call it the electrocardiogram, or simply in short, the ECG. So it involves placing some sensors, which you call them electrodes, across every part of your body, and they will be able to pick those impulses, which are simply electrical signals generated from your heart and transmitted into the rest of your body via electrolytes. We know electrolytes are good conductors of electricity, and much of your extracellular fluid is made up of electrolyte. These impulses will be picked, and they are very weak, so they have to be amplified, or increase the frequencies of that one into something readable. And once we record that wave or that electricity in a paper form, we end up with what you call the ECG tracing, that you can either be able to see it in a screen or you can see it in a paper. And it looks something like this, which I think you are all aware of that one. I saw someone, I think maybe in your class, who has a tattoo of an ECG pacer that was badly drawn, and I meant to have corrected her that it was physiologically incorrect. It's made up of these parts. We label them using some alphabet, but for some reason, the person who started it initially decided that we should start labeling from letter P and not letter A. And we still stuck with that one for over around 150, 100 years plus so now. So we have we start from letter P all the way to T. So letter P, which is the start part of it, is just a slight increase in the amplitude. And that one represents the impulse or the electrical signal that is released when the Fe node releases a charge, and it causes the contraction of the atria. And we call that process depolarization or simply contraction. It will later be followed by this other wave that is made up of three parts, the Q, R, and the S. And each part of the QRS, we call it the QRS complex, represent three waves that join together. And all three waves simply represent the ventricle contraction. And we still call that one the process of depolarization. After that, as you can see, we have another peak, and we call that one the T wave. And the T waves represent the ventricle's relaxation, or what you call repolarization. So those are the three waves. So we have the P wave, the QRS complex, and the T waves. And usually it appears this way in a normal beating heart. And once we count it and we know the number of these boxes, we can be able to count and see how many of these waves we have in 10 boxes. And we multiply them by a factor because we know the gradation or the subdivision of this paper called the ECG paper. And you can be able to calculate the heart rate only by counting them and dividing them using some other factor. But so the distance from P to Q represent a distance that the waves take from the AV node all the way until it reaches the bundle block at the ventricles. And that duration can be increased or reduced, and some pathological condition develops from that. So as a procedure for ECG tracing, we use the 12-lead ECG, which I hope by the time you went to your lab practicals in most, I hope you have been taken through this one. And if you are not been taken, don't worry. At the hospitals, you have the ECG machines, and it's a skill that you learn as part of any other nursing procedure, but you classify advanced nursing procedure. Doing it is one thing, but learning on how to interpret it is also another thing. But by simply knowing how the heart operates, form the basis of it. We connect the electrodes into the three limbs, that is the right, left hand, and the left leg. And then the right leg will usually tend to act as our heart. And then we connect other six across the chest using some specific positions that I think you should learn. You should be taken through it as a procedure on its own. But through the six lead, we call them the precordial or the chest leads, and the three limb leads, you are able to get all the impulses and record it on paper. That was about the impulses of the heart, and we come now to what you call the heartbeats. Heartbeat is what you listen when you place your stethoscope over someone's chest, and you get two sounds of heart. So we simply call them the first heart sound and the second heart sound. The first heart sound, we usually call it the loop, because it's a bit low pitch, using the advanced audio stethoscope, and it's simply caused, or it's rather caused by the Fe valves closing. And the second heart sound, which usually has a sharper sound and a little bit short, and that's how we describe it at loop, is caused by the closure of the semilunar valves. So these two heart sounds come at a small intervals, and you'll be always hearing that loop, doop, loop, doop. And it's because of the opening and the closings of those valves. So the heart rate is simply the heart is beating how many times per minute. And we say what determines that one is the rate at which the cells at the Fe nodes are firing, and that one will give us the heart rate. Usually we say an average of 72, but clinical or physiological purposes, we give a range. That range is between 60 to 100. We consider that one normal heartbeat. Each and every time that heartbeat goes below 60, we call that one a low heartbeat. That one is called bradycardia. If it goes above 100, that is a fast heart rate, and we call that one the tachycardia. The rate of beating of the heart, we call it the normal systole or simply systole. And in case we have some abnormal that the heart is not beating regularly, we call that an arrhythmia. And it can be as well be able to be picked by the ECG tracing paper. So fibrillation is simply some uncoordinated relaxation and the contraction of the heart, and we usually consider that one to be a cardiac emergency. So the last term there is what we call the cardiac output, which we have been mentioning since the beginning of this session. So the cardiac output is the volume of blood that the heart is able to pump each and every minute. And that is the volume of blood in the ventricles each and every time the heart beats, the volume of the ventricles, and you multiply that volume by how many times the heart is beating, and that one will give us a cardiac output. These are the region where you can be able to auscultate, I think through the nursing skills or procedure or physical examination you are taken through at this point, as the right and the left are second intercostal spaces, and together also with the sixth intercostal space for getting the apex of the heart. And these are also the regions that we apply those electrodes for ECG to get maximum recording. So this is a cardiac cycle. It's simply a diagram illustrating what we have been talking about. This is contractions and relaxations of the ventricles and atrias. And it always starts from phase 1 to 7. And in phase 1, we start from atrium, and we call that one simply the contraction of the atrial, represented by the green line there. It's not quite visible well, but the time the atrias contract, both of them, we call that one the systole. We reach some point where we have a contraction, but the volume is not increasing, reducing, and we call that one the isovolumetric. Iso means zero or constant. So the volume is zero, but we're still having a contractions of the cardiac muscles. It would be followed by the rapid ejection. So rapid ejection is when the ventricles are pumping blood out, which happen in two stages. So initially it will pump very fast. We call that on the rapid ejection in a few seconds, followed by a slightly slower ejection, which also take another seconds before the valves closes. And once the valve will have another relaxation. Relaxations occur without the relaxations of the muscles, that the volume still remain the same as much as you're having a relaxation. And call that one isovolumetric relaxation. So we have phase 2, which is isovolumetric contraction, and phase 6, which is phase 5, which is isovolumetric. So finally, we have feeling. This is where the atriums are bad, because after the pumping by the ventricles, and same with the ventricles. So the filling of the atria occur in two phases. So we have a rapid initial phase, which is followed by a slightly reduced filling phase, and that one, the cycles complete and it will start again. Each and after every heartbeat, the cycles repeat. And through that one, at the end of the minute, using the volume, that is how we are able to get or calculate the cardiac output. At the same time, when you see the ECG tracing, so we have our P waves here caused by the contractions of the atria, represented by letter A. And then we have the QRS complex, which we said the three waves combined together represent the contractions of the ventricle. And once the ventricle contracts, it coincides rapid ejection. That one is relaxation is authorization by the way of the P until, and it will this is volume indicate the left ventricular and diastolic. At the end of that one, it will reduce and it will repeat again. The cycle continues. So the contraction we call it the systole, and the relaxation we call it diastole. So this is what you call the cardiac cycle, or the phases or the events in the cardiac cycle. So in summary, we said it start from the atrium, and this is where FE node it causes contraction. Later, the ventricle will have the ejection by the ventricles, which occurs in two phases, a rapid one and a slow one. And once we have the ejection of blood, the valves will close and the atria will be filled with blood again. And we call that one both the rapid and the slow filling processes. So that is a sum of the cardiac. Once you understand that one, we'll almost business of the cardiovascular system and the cardiac cycle. And you know the cardiac cycle coincide with the ECG, and we say the ECG are simply the visual recording of the impulses from the heart. You'll go, and now from the rest of the remaining slides, we'll just be adding a few things to make it a whole complete, being the major system in the body. So let's talk about this is where your nursing skill come today. I know maybe you went to the ward today, you too, and maybe it's an automated one, but for your learning processes, we use the old or the analog one. We call it a sphygmomanometer. And you have to hear about that correlative sound. It takes time to learn it, but it's a gold standard one because it usually doesn't have an error. Let's see what you have been recording in the ward today on exactly that one. Maybe you also took a pulse oximeter and you put it on the finger and you're able to record the oxygen saturation, and at the same time it gives you the pulse rate. So the blood pressure is simply the pressure exerted by the blood on the walls of the blood vessels. And we record that one on larger blood vessels and usually on the limbs. And for convenience purposes, we use the brachial artery, but sometimes we can use the lower limb at the same time, mostly maybe in theater or when reasons we are unable to access it. So that pressure is recorded in unit of millimeter of mercury. And we have two. We have the systolic pressure. And I think just remember for your diagram initially that we say the systole is the contraction phase. And the contraction phase, when you take pressure at that time, we get what we call the systolic pressure. And during the relaxation phase, which we call is the diastole. So that is a time when in between the two heartbeat,